wonderful music. Welcome to online services here at Rochester Unitarian. We are so glad that you are here with us this morning. Our mission is through spiritual connection and community. We listen deeply to others and ourselves, open to wonder and transformation, and serve together with love and humility. I'm Shannon Foos, Membership Coordinator, and leading worship today are the Reverend Margalie Belazaire, Megan Garvey, Tommy Snell, Melissa Boyack, Leah Morris, and Arsen Yamkochian. Behind the scenes, as usual, we have our ushers, greeters, making things happen so we can come together. We also have our chat chaplain, Susie Farrell, today. So if you're going through a tough time, you're worried about somebody else, or just need somebody to listen, please reach out to her. I have a few things to share today. The first is that we'd love to hear from you. In your email, you should have received a congregational survey, and the link is there for you to tell us about our church. As always, we'll be having our conversation and connection hour after service, so please join us for that. I also have a special announcement to share, and that is about Beloved Conversations. If you haven't heard about it yet, we'll be having a gathering on Wednesday, February 10 at 7 o'clock with Reverend Margalie. It'll be at our normal church Zoom, the same one you're on, and it'll be an informational meeting about Beloved Conversation, which is a program from UU's seeking to embody racial justice as a spiritual practice. And it's a way to heal the impact of racism on our lives in order to get free together. Please take a look at the website between now and Wednesday. We'll put together a link in the chat for you toward the end of service. Finally, we ask that you don't register separately as you can do on the website. We are looking to get a group rate, so please feel free to reach out to Reverend Margalie with questions to tell her that you're interested, and we'll also put that in the chat. And so it'll have Reverend Margalie, and then you'll have a link for Beloved Conversations. All right, so let's all take a deep breath together. Let's settle down and to this sacred time and space. Please join me in saying our chalice lighting words. May the flame we now kindle inspire us to use our power to heal with love, to help with compassion, to bless with joy, and to seek liberation and the fullness of community.
Several years ago, I found myself in the middle of a rather chaotic move. Though I had been passively contemplating a move back to Rochester for some time, a job offer I just couldn't resist came up way sooner than I had anticipated, and I suddenly found myself with 30 days to move my life halfway across the country. These 30 days were a bit of a blur, as you might imagine, with to-do lists and goodbyes galore. I felt like I blinked and I found myself back here in Rochester. As the first few weeks went by, I was glad to be home and in my new opportunity, but I also noticed a profound sense of restlessness I couldn't quite put my finger on. No matter what I did, I couldn't shake it. After trying everything I could possibly think of, I decided that I needed to go to the one place that had always brought me solace throughout my life, no matter what was happening: my childhood church. I went and sat in the sanctuary by myself in my very favorite pew. I did it the same way I always had done it, and I waited. And I waited. And I waited, but nothing changed. And it made no sense to me. I was doing all the things I needed to do to try to process what I was feeling. Everything was going the way that I wanted to. Why wouldn't this restlessness break? And as this litany of questions just kind of persisted, I looked around my most beloved space and I noticed that the long deteriorating stained glass windows of my childhood had been replaced with new ones. And then it happened. Suddenly, I was overcome with tears, and not subtle ones. Like, we're talking like mascara running, snot bubbling, sobbing kinds of tears. And with every emotion I had not had the opportunity or time or ability to process in the last couple of weeks, came a statement I exclaimed to the sky: "You changed my windows." And I think this is why we come to church. This church. Here at First Unitarian, we hold space for the messy reality that sometimes our heads and our hearts need a little time to catch up to one another. Even when we find ourselves in the midst of changes we really want to see, things that we waited for, things we've been hoping for a long time, it can be a little tricky to sit with the reality that sometimes our emotional responses may not look like what we thought they would, or maybe they fall on a different timeline than we expected. Here we hold, in a holy grace, space for all of the messy, complicated experiences of our heads and our hearts on this wild journey of life.
Good morning, everybody. Please join me in singing our next hymn. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around, turn me around, turn me around. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around. Keep on walking, keep on talking, gonna build a brand new world. Ain't gonna let no policeman turn me around, turn me around, turn me around. Ain't gonna let no policeman turn me around. Keep on walking, keep on talking, gonna build a brand new world. Ain't gonna let no white supremacy turn me around, turn me around, turn me around. Ain't gonna let no white supremacy turn me around. Keep on walking, keep on talking, gonna build a brand new world. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around, turn me around, turn me around. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around. Keep on walking, keep on talking, gonna build a brand new world.
I would like to invite you now into the spiritual practice of generosity. This week, our plate offering will be split between our church and Cameron Community Ministries. Cameron Community Ministries is an urban outreach community center in the Lyle Otis neighborhood. Their mission is to work in partnership to create a vibrant and thriving community through empowerment and advocacy while meeting basic needs, including a free hot meal program, an emergency food pantry, a clothing and houseware supply, and empowerment programs for youth. Please give generously as you are able.
Abide with me, fast falls the eventide, the darkness deepens, still other helpers fail and comforts flee. Help of the helpless, oh, abide with me. Swift to its close, ebbs out life's little day. Earth's joys grow dim, its glories pass away. Change and decay in all around I see. O thou who changes not, abide with me. We need each other every passing hour. Channels of grace and life affirming power. Faithful companions, share this path with me. Through all our fears and hopes, abide with me.
Let's take a deep breath. I now invite you into meditative prayer, followed by a minute of silence. Spirit that knows us best, gather with us here this morning following yet another incident of violence in our city. This one we know about, but how many others go unheard by us? How many others seem too distant in space or time to be important? We are also here this morning with our own personal griefs, some shared with friends, others we've kept to ourselves. Spirit, we ask that you lighten the load and allow space for peace of mind. And joy is not lacking among us here, even in the midst of suffering. Some of us are also here this morning with great joys and small ones too. Provide a container for however we're feeling this morning, whether happy, confused, angry, uneasy, hopeful, however we show up. May we leave this space at the end of service feeling refreshed and ready to live out our values in the world. May we be so blessed
Songs for the People by Frances Ellen Watkins Harper. Let me make the songs for the people, songs for the old and young, songs to stir like a battle cry wherever they are sung. Not for the clashing of sabers, for carnage, nor for strife, but songs to thrill the hearts of men with more abundant life. Let me make the songs for the weary amid life's fever and fret, till hearts shall relax their tension and careworn brows forget. Let me sing for little children before their footsteps stray, sweet anthems of love and duty to float o'er life's highway. I would sing for the poor and aged when shadows dim their sight, of the bright and restful mansions where there shall be no night. Our world, so worn and weary, needs music pure and strong to hush the jangle and discords of sorrow, pain, and wrong. Music to soothe all its sorrow, till war and crime shall cease, and the hearts of men grown tender girdle the world with peace.
The 22-year-old poet laureate Amanda Gorman captured the hearts of many Americans with her poem, The Hill We Climbed, at the inaugural ceremonies this past January 20th. Though many became acquainted with her on that day, she has been writing and reciting poetry for most of her young life. She's actually a published author of a book of poetry called The One for Whom Food Is Not Enough, and is in the process of releasing a children's book. She is in fact an activist who uses poetry to fight oppression, racism, and sexism. In the inaugural poem, the line that stuck with me is, "We, the successors of a country and a time where a skinny Black girl descended from slaves and raised by a single mother can dream of becoming president, only to find herself reciting for one." I suppose there are more impressive lines in this rich and meaningful poem, but this one reminds me of perhaps another skinny Black girl who was born 173 years before Amanda in 1825, the abolitionist and suffragist Frances Ellen Watkins Harper. She also used poetry and other writings as a form of activism. Her first published work happened when she was just 14. Her first book at age 20. She went on to have a long and fruitful career writing, lecturing, and teaching. Unlike Amanda, though, she was not the successor of a country where she could have imagined a skinny Black girl reciting a poem before a president, let alone dream of becoming one. Yet, even as she moved about in the world in a Black body and a female body, in that time period when she lived, she managed to succeed in accomplishing so much. Heck, her accomplishments are impressive in any time period. Through it all, her words, her intellect, were the method of choice in her fight against racial and gender oppression. So this morning, I want to share with you a little bit about the life of Frances Harper, who was both Black and one of our Unitarian ancestors. I am fascinated by her life and feel that there are many lessons to learn from this amazing human being on what it means to dedicate one's life to social justice causes. I am also intrigued at how 3 major events in her life shaped her and possibly turned her into the compelling person she became, even with so many constraints and barriers in her way.
My mother's kiss, my mother's kiss. I feel its impress now. As in the bright and happy days, she pressed it on my brow. You say it is a fancied thing within my memory fraught. To me, it has a sacred place, the treasured house of thought. Again, I feel her fingers glide amid my clustering hair. I see the love light in her eyes. Frances Ellen Watkins Harper from the poem, My Mother's Kiss.
The first major event is the death of her parents and how that changed her upbringing. Frances was born to free Black parents in Baltimore, Maryland in 1825, though that state was still a slave state at the time. Nothing else is known about her parents, even their last name, other than that they died when she was just 3 years old, leaving her an orphan at such a young age. She was raised by her maternal aunt and uncle, Henrietta and William J. Watkins Sr., whose last name she was given. Reverend Watkins was a civil rights activist, an abolitionist, and a writer. He was also a minister of a Methodist church and ran his own school, Watkins Academy for Negro Youth. This is where the young activist in the making, Frances, was educated until age 13. If you can imagine, this was during a time when access to school was greatly restricted in general and was almost an impossibility for Black children, yet Frances was able to be educated. When I look at the person she became, I can't help but think of how much being raised in that environment, how much her uncle's choices impacted and influenced her own life's choices. After leaving school, she was a seamstress and a nursemaid for a Quaker family who owned a bookshop. Harper took advantage of this and read while at the shop and wrote whenever she had any free time. At age 14, she began submitting her work to anti-slavery journals that subsequently published them. From there, she seemed unstoppable. Her first book, Forest Leaves, was published in 1845 when she was 20 years old. There is an interesting story about this book, for it was considered lost to the literary world for over 150 years. That is until 2010, when a doctoral student found it at the Maryland Historical Society while working on her dissertation on the life of Harper. In her lifetime, Harper published over 80 poems, several books, speeches, articles, and so on. William Still, the abolitionist and a conductor on the Underground Railroad, wrote, "The ability Harper exhibited in some of her work was so remarkable that some doubted and others denied their originality." Her anti-slavery book, Iola Leroy, is perhaps the most known of her writings. She was the first Black woman to publish a short story, The Two Offers, which was published in 1859, and was one among just a few Black women of her time to make a living through writing. At the core of her writing was activism, though her subjects varied, as you might have noticed in the poems read by Tommy and Megan. The one Megan read was chosen since several of her poems dealt with mother-child bond, which was certainly something she witnessed a lot, which was something that was in a lot of danger in her time, with the slave mother not being able to raise her own children. And Tommy's poem, Song for the People, he chose that because, well, music is one of the ways he shows up for social justice work. You'll find that there are also a lot of Christian language in her writings, for she was, after all, a Unitarian, which meant something different in those days with regards to Christianity. I can't help but wonder how differently Frances' life would have been, how it would have turned out if she wasn't raised in her uncle's home, if she didn't experience up close his example of radicalism, or if she didn't have access to education, or even the job she ended with at a bookshop, which afforded her time to read and write. As an abolitionist, she worked as a political activist for the American Anti-Slavery Society, an abolitionist organization that William Garrison co-founded. She was a traveling lecturer and appeared publicly with the likes of Frederick Douglass, giving anti-slavery speeches. She documented her travel in letters to friends. In one account, she talks about how wonderful New Englanders were to her and how horribly she was treated by Philadelphians. Incidentally, she refused to give up her seat on the bus while traveling in Philadelphia. That was in 1858, almost 100 years before Rosa Parks. That same year, she wrote the poem, "Bury Me in a Free Land," one of her best known poems, excerpts from which is inscribed on one of the walls of the Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture. In 1865, after the Civil War, she moved to the South, specifically Alabama, to help teach newly freed folks how to read. She also worked for the Freedmen's Bureau, encouraging the newly freed to buy land, as land ownership would afford them the right to vote. This next poem is a celebration of Black men being granted the right to vote.
Ring out your sweetest chimes, ye bells that call to praise. Let every heart with gladness thrill and songs of joyful triumph raise. Shake off the dust, O rising race, crowned as a brother and a man. Justice today asserts her claim, from thy brow fades out the ban. With freedom's chrism upon thy head, her precious ensign in thy hand, go place thy once despised name amid the noblest of the land. A ransom race, give God the praise, who let thee through a crimson sea, and mid the storm of fire and blood, turned out the war cloud's light to thee. Frances Ellen Watkins Harper, from the poem, The 15th Amendment.
What I wonder about is if Frances would have become the passionate racial justice activist that she did, if not for the second event that took place around age 26. While living in Ohio and teaching domestic skills at Union Seminary, Maryland, her home state, passed a fugitive slave law. This law put her at risk of being enslaved, even though she was born free, as it allowed for her and other free Blacks to be arrested and sold into slavery. She remained in Ohio at the home of William Still and his family for 2 years, and it was there during that time that she seemed to have dedicated her life to fight racial justice. In addition to racial justice, Frances was very much a suffragist. Her fight for just treatment of women started as a result of this third life-changing experience. In fact, she had withdrawn from public life after marrying Fenton Harper in 1860 at age 35. Fenton was a widower with 3 children. The couple came to have a child together who they named Mary Frances Harper. Speaking to an audience at a suffragist event, Frances recounts this turning point.
Born of a race whose inheritance has been outrage and wrong. Most of my life had been spent in battling against these wrongs. But I did not feel as keenly as others that I had these rights in common with other women, which are now demanded. About 2 years ago, I stood within the shadows of my home. A great sorrow had fallen upon my life. My husband had died suddenly, leaving me a widow with 4 children, one of my own and the other stepchildren. I tried to keep my children together, but my husband died in debt. And before he had been in his grave 3 months, the administrator had swept the very milk crocks and wash tubs from my hands. I was a farmer's wife and made butter for the Columbus market, but what could I do when they had all but swept away? They left me with one thing, and that was a looking glass. Had I died instead of my husband, how different would have been the result? By the time he would have had another wife, it is likely. And no administrator would have gone into his house, broken up his home, and sold his bed and taken away his means of support. Frances Ellen Watkins Harper.
What is even more unjust about the story is that she initially bought the farm with her own money. Anyway, she partnered with Frances Willard, also a suffragist, to demand both racial and gender equality. They did have a falling out, though, when Harper felt that Willard was putting the concerns of white women above those of Black women and other civil rights issues pertaining to Blacks in general. Her primary focus became the improvement of the lives of African American women. She co-founded the National Association of Colored Women with Ida Wells Barnett, Harriet Tubman, and some others. As for her chosen faith, it was Unitarianism. And it is reported that she was active in the movement, as exemplified by the life she led, and she was supported in her abolitionist work. When she died in 1911 at the age of 86, her funeral was at her home congregation, First Unitarian Church of Philadelphia. What an amazing human being, and what an inspiring ancestor in our faith. Amanda Gorman is right in that we are the successor of a world and a time when much has been improved with regards to what skinny Black girls can aspire to become or do. At the same time, there is much work ahead of us with regards to just treatment for all. We still live in a world and a time where 9-year-old Black girls can be pepper sprayed by the police. So the work isn't done yet. And as a friend once said, love wins at the end. And since love has not won yet, we better get to working. Frances Ellen Watkins Harper's life has much to teach us. One of the obvious lessons is how to use the gifts we are born with and nurtured to engage in social justice work. Her primary gifts were the use of words and her intellect, her poetry, her writings. For another, it might be music. Another yet, protesting, marching. Others still, it's providing care. How about you? What is your gift? What are your gifts? How do you do social justice? I will now end by reading one of Harper's better known poems, perhaps one of her best known poems. Make me a grave wherever you will, on lowly plain or lofty hill. Make it amongst earth's humblest graves, but not in a land where men are slaves. I could not rest if around my grave I heard the steps of a trembling slave. His shadow above my silent tomb would make it a place of fearful gloom. I could not rest if I heard the tread of a cuffle gang to the shambles led. And the mother's shriek of wild despair rise like a curse on the trembling air. I could not sleep if I saw the lash drinking her blood at each fearful gash, and I saw her babes torn from her breast like trembling dove from their parents' nest. I'd shudder if I heard the bay of bloodhounds seizing their human prey, and I heard the captive plead in vain as they bound of flesh his galling chain. If I saw young girls from their mother's arms bartered and sold for their youthful charms, my eyes would flash with a mournful flame, my death pale cheek grow red with shame. I would sleep, dear friends, where bloated might can rob no man of his dearest right. My rest shall be calm in any grave where no one call his brother a slave. I ask no monument proud and high to arrest the gaze of passersby. All that my yearning spirit craves is bury me not in a land of slaves.
Please join me now in singing I Know I Can.
Troubles wait at every turn. I know I can go on when sorrow leaves my soul and burdens make me strong. Though troubles wait at every turn, I know I can go on. And though the journey's long, the destination is near. When hope awaits at every turn, I know we will go on.
Please join me in saying our chalice extinguishing words. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
Dear one, go in peace. Be well. Live gently yet powerfully. Use your gifts for the betterment of the world. The worship has ended, and now the service truly begins.